Welcome to a journey back through time, where we'll uncover the hidden mysteries of our prehistoric ancestors. If you've ever wondered, what did cavemen really eat to survive the harsh forces of nature? Then this is the story for you. In the series, What Did Cavemen Really Eat? Prehistoric Diet Revealed, we won't just tell tales, but also unlock the science behind each ancient meal. From frozen game meat and rugged roots buried deep underground to the forgotten nutritional secrets that once shaped human survival. This story unfolds across 5 chapters, each one a step through tens of thousands of years of evolution, revealing how food molded the mind, strength, and very future of humankind. Every part will guide you through wild prehistoric landscapes, astonishing archaeological discoveries, and intriguing theories about the connection between flavor and survival. And don't worry, you won't just learn, you'll also drift peacefully to sleep. The slow rhythm of narration and the ambient sounds of the ancient world will carry you into a calm, dreamlike slumber, like resting beside a flickering campfire under a Stone Age sky. If you love history, exploration, or simply want to know what humanity's very first dinner looked like, then subscribe now. The story begins, and the past is waiting for you to explore. Imagine waking up one morning, say 2 million years ago. No coffee, no toast, no fridge humming in the corner, just cold wind, the smell of damp stone, and your stomach growling like an angry mammoth. Welcome to the world of Homo habilis, one of the first human species to use tools. Habilis means handy, though, to be honest, their handiness was more about not dying than cooking anything fancy. So, what did they eat to stay alive? Simple. Anything they could find that didn't kill them first. Breakfast back then wasn't glamorous. No organic granola, no kale smoothies, just half-rotten carcasses left behind by real predators. Yes, you heard that right. Early humans were scavengers, professional leftovers eaters. They waited patiently for lions or saber-toothed cats to finish a meal, then crept in to scrape off whatever meat was left. Archaeologists found animal bones marked with flint tool cuts, clear evidence our ancestors were using sharp stones to shave off scraps of meat. Disgusting? Maybe. But that disgusting buffet of bone and sinew gave them the protein needed to grow bigger brains. And that's why you can sit here today, watching history videos over Wi-Fi. Evolution's version of worth it. But it wasn't all meat. For a long time, scientists thought early humans were classic hunters and gatherers, which sounds like a balanced lifestyle, maybe even a diet trend. Yet evidence suggests the gathering part did most of the heavy lifting. They ate roots, tubers, nuts, berries, and occasionally beetles. Yes, bugs, packed with protein, 0 carbs, Michelin-starred in no universe. How do we know this? From teeth. Specifically, from microwear patterns. Microscopic scratches and pits that form on tooth enamel depending on what you chew. Under a microscope, those tiny marks become a kind of diary of the diet. And unlike politicians, teeth don't lie. Through these traces, we know that early humans didn't just eat at random. They learned to choose. They figured out which berries were safe, which roots were deadly, and which leaves made you sleep forever. That wisdom was passed down, sometimes by word of mouth, sometimes by the tragic example of the first poor soul who tested the wrong fruit. Picture it. One curious caveman picks up a weird fruit, takes a bite, grimaces, collapses. The tribe stares. Someone finally mutters, "Okay, don't eat that one." And thus, science was born. Despite their reputation as brutes, early humans were surprisingly refined eaters. They eventually discovered fire, and that changed everything. Fire was the original culinary revolution, making food safer, easier to digest, and far more energy efficient for the brain. Archaeological finds from places like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa show traces of ancient ash over 1 million years old, suggesting that even before language fully evolved, our ancestors were already experimenting with barbecue. Cooking, according to anthropologist Richard Wrangham's cooking hypothesis, may have been the single biggest leap in human evolution, allowing us to absorb more calories, build bigger brains, and think faster. So next time you fire up the grill, remember, you're part of a 2-million-year culinary tradition. Only now, you don't have to rub rocks together to get the flame going. In short, the moral of part 1 is this. Prehistoric humans didn't eat fancy. They ate to survive, and survival made us human. From scraped bone marrow to tough wild roots, every bite brought us one step closer to civilization. And honestly, if a Homo habilis could see you today paying $20 for bone marrow toast at a trendy restaurant, they'd probably roll their eyes and say, "We were eating that before it was cool." Now, let's get one thing straight. Early humans didn't invent fire like some genius shouting "Eureka!" while striking 2 rocks together. Most likely, they stole it from nature. Maybe lightning hit a tree or lava spilled down a hill, and a curious hominin, our prehistoric cousin, stood there, eyes wide, thinking, "Whoa, it's hot, it's scary, and it's kind of awesome." At first, fire was a mystery, beautiful and dangerous. Archaeological evidence suggests that our ancestors didn't immediately know what to do with it. They might have just stared at it, terrified it would burn the camp down. But over time, a few brave souls, and possibly a few singed eyebrows, learned how to control it. That's when everything changed. Fire meant warmth, safety, light, and, most importantly, cooked food. Now, let's talk science for a second. Raw food requires a lot of energy to digest. Your jaw has to work overtime, and your gut becomes a full-time factory. Cooking breaks down cellulose. That's the tough plant fiber your body can't digest easily, and denatures proteins. A fancy way of saying it unlocks the nutrients inside. The result? More energy, less chewing. Essentially, fire did for our ancestors what microwaves do for college students. Made life easier and meals digestible. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham, yes, the cooking hypothesis guy again, argues that cooking was the evolutionary turning point. When early humans started heating their meals, their bodies adapted. Smaller jaws, shorter guts, and boom, bigger brains. You could say fire cooked us into becoming us. But let's not romanticize it too much. Early cooking probably wasn't Gordon Ramsay level. Imagine someone tosses a hunk of mammoth meat straight into a pile of embers, half burns it, half leaves it raw. Voila, prehistoric steak tartare. Michelin would not approve. Still, it was progress, and progress smells like smoke and roasted fat. Fire also changed social life. Before it, nights were short and terrifying. You went to sleep when the sun went down because darkness meant danger. But now, with a fire flickering at the center of the camp, people could gather, share food, tell stories, and, according to some anthropologists, even start developing language. Firelight gave humans a reason to stay awake, to communicate, to connect. It's not a stretch to say that the first conversations in human history happened around a fire pit. And of course, fire made food safer. Bacteria? Gone. Parasites? Toast. Literally. You were far less likely to die from your dinner, a significant improvement in quality of life, don't you think? Interestingly, some researchers believe that learning to cook also shifted gender roles in prehistoric society. Since cooking required tending a fire and preparing food close to camp, it might have led to more stable social structures, what you could call the first domestic spaces. So in a way, the first home wasn't a building. It was a circle of stones around a fire. Let's pause for a moment and imagine the scene. Night falls over the savannah. Sparks drift upward into a sky full of stars. A group of early humans sits in silence, chewing slowly on cooked meat, their faces glowing orange from the flames. For the first time in history, they feel warmth, safety, and maybe even comfort. Somewhere in that moment, something extraordinary happened. Fear turned into fascination. The same flame that once scared them became a tool, a friend, even a symbol. Fire was no longer just a force of nature. It was theirs. And from that moment forward, dinner was never the same again. So next time you're roasting marshmallows over a campfire or watching a flickering candle on your dinner table, remember, you're participating in a ritual that began over 1,000,000 years ago. A ritual that gave birth to community, culture, and civilization itself. Because before there were cities or kings or cathedrals, there was just a group of hungry humans sitting by a fire realizing that survival could finally taste good. Fire gave us power, but hunger, real hunger, gave us purpose. After generations of scavenging the leftovers of lions and hyenas, early humans eventually got tired of waiting for someone else's dinner to be over. Imagine standing at a distance, drooling over a zebra carcass while a pack of hyenas tears it apart. Not exactly a dignified way to live. So one day, someone, maybe out of desperation, maybe out of sheer stubbornness, decided, why don't we just get our own zebra? And thus began the age of the hunter. Now, let's be clear. Early humans weren't instantly good at hunting. Far from it. If you imagine them sprinting heroically across the plains with spears flying in slow motion, forget it. The first hunters were more like overconfident interns who didn't read the manual. They didn't have bows or arrows yet, and their spears were basically sharpened sticks that broke if you sneezed too hard. But they had brains, and that made all the difference. See, humans weren't the fastest or the strongest, but we had two evolutionary superpowers, endurance and teamwork. Unlike most predators that rely on short bursts of speed, humans could run and sweat for hours. That's right. We're built for persistence hunting, which is exactly what it sounds like, chasing your prey until it literally collapses from exhaustion. Sounds brutal? It was, but it worked. Here's how it went down. A group of hunters would spot, say, an antelope. They'd start running, not full sprint, just a steady jog. The antelope, terrified, would bolt, sprinting for miles, then stop to rest, panting under the heat. But humans kept coming, slowly but surely, tracking it by footprints, scent, or even subtle signs like broken grass. Hours later, the poor animal would overheat and drop dead, its killer arriving calmly, drenched in sweat, but victorious. Congratulations, humanity. You just invented cardio with a purpose. But hunting wasn't just about meat. It was about organization, cooperation, communication, planning. If scavenging was about luck, hunting was about strategy. This shift forced humans to think ahead, to plan routes, read the landscape, anticipate animal behavior. Some researchers even argue that this is where abstract thinking and proto-language, early forms of speech, started evolving. You can almost hear it. You flank left, I go right. Try not to die this time. And of course, the reward was massive. Meat, rich in calories, protein, and fat. It's no coincidence that once humans became successful hunters, their brains started growing faster. A brain is an energy-hungry organ. It burns about 20% of your daily calories. Without a high-energy food source like animal fat, evolution might have left us as clever monkeys instead of world-conquering sapiens. But here's the funny part. We weren't just eating meat raw anymore. Thanks to our earlier discovery of fire, we now had the first prehistoric grill party. Picture this, a group of Homo erectus, our next evolutionary step, sitting around a fire, roasting fresh meat they'd actually killed themselves. The smell of cooked fat fills the air. Someone accidentally drops a piece into the flames, and another immediately declares it extra crispy. The first food preference in history is born. Over time, this new lifestyle changed everything, not just how we ate, but who we were. Hunting meant moving across wider territories, learning the seasons, understanding migrations. It forged cooperation, courage, and maybe even storytelling. When the hunt was over, the tribe would sit by the fire, retelling the day's events, probably exaggerating a little. I totally speared that mammoth myself. Sound familiar? That's right. Hunting may have given birth to the very first stories. But hunting also had a dark side. It was dangerous, exhausting, and often deadly. One bad throw, one wrong step, and you could end up being dinner instead of having it, which is why some groups still relied heavily on gathering plants, a safer, more predictable food source. The balance between hunting and gathering wasn't just about diet, it was about risk management. Still, the thrill of the hunt, the victory, the shared feast, became a cornerstone of early human identity. It taught us persistence, patience, and cooperation. And deep down, that instinct never really left us. You can see it every time someone cheers when their Amazon package arrives, the modern version of a successful hunt. So by the end of this chapter, humanity had transformed. We weren't scavengers anymore. We were predators, intelligent, sweaty, slightly clumsy predators with a growing brain and an evolving appetite. And somewhere out there, under a burning African sun, the first group of humans roasted their first fresh meal, feeling, for the very first time, the intoxicating taste of victory. They didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning, because the next revolution in human eating wouldn't come from hunting or fire, but from something far smaller, sneakier, and greener. Chapter 2, Part 1, The Seeds of Change, When Dinner Stopped Running Away. By now, humanity had conquered the wild, or at least learned how to chase it until it dropped dead. For hundreds of thousands of years, life revolved around the hunt. You wake up, you run, you throw spears, you eat, you tell the story, you sleep. Repeat. Efficient? Sure. Sustainable? Not so much, because one day the herds moved on, and the hunters followed, hungry, tired, and probably arguing about whose turn it was to carry the bones. But around 12,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened. Humans, who had spent millions of years chasing food, suddenly looked down at the ground and thought, wait, what if food came to us? Welcome to the agricultural revolution, the moment everything, and I mean everything, changed. At first, it probably wasn't a grand revelation. Maybe some seeds got dropped near a campsite, got rained on, and weeks later, surprise, little green sprouts appeared. Someone noticed and said, "Hey, that looks like what we ate last month." Boom! Farming was born, not from genius, but from accidental laziness. But once humans realized they could control food, they were unstoppable. Wheat, barley, rice, maize, millet. Each region had its own miracle crop. The Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia, the Nile River Valley, the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers in China, Mesoamerica, all of them became cradles of civilization. And make no mistake, civilization was born because dinner stopped running away. Let's pause for some science. Plants, you see, are master manipulators. Humans thought they were domesticating crops, but in a weird way, the plants were domesticating us. Wheat evolved to depend on humans to spread its seeds. Humans evolved to depend on wheat to survive. It's a toxic relationship that somehow works. Before agriculture, people were tall, muscular, and generally pretty healthy. Their diet was diverse: meat, roots, berries, nuts, insects, and whatever else they could find. But when we switched to farming, our diets narrowed dramatically. Suddenly, 80% of calories came from a single grain. The result? Shorter stature, weaker bones, more disease. The first farmers were less healthy than the hunter-gatherers they replaced. So yes, the first bread came with a side of malnutrition. Still, farming had one unbeatable advantage: stability. You could stay in one place, grow food, store it, and plan ahead. No more chasing herds or gambling on the next hunt. For the first time in history, humans could build permanent homes, raise bigger families, and, inevitably, argue over property lines. Congratulations! Food security gave birth to civilization and conflict, all at once. But with stability came hierarchy. In hunter-gatherer societies, food was shared. You hunted, you shared the kill. But on a farm, food could be owned. Whoever controlled the fields controlled the power. This was the beginning of social classes, rulers, and taxes. Imagine the first prehistoric farmer sighing as a guy with a spear walked up and said, "Nice crops. I'll take 10%. And thus, the world's first IRS was born. Meanwhile, animals joined the party too. Humans began domesticating goats, sheep, and cattle, the original farm-to-table concept, except the table was a rock, and the farm was your backyard. Domestication wasn't just about food, though. Animals provided milk, hides, and muscle power for plowing. In return, humans offered protection and endless gossip around the campfire. And let's not forget the culinary implications. Farming allowed for fermentation, storage, and, crucially, alcohol. Yes, the first beers and wines appeared not long after agriculture began. Some archaeologists even argue that humans invented farming because they wanted to make alcohol. If that's true, civilization didn't rise from bread. It rose from beer. And honestly, that sounds about right. Still, let's not sugarcoat it, even though sugar would come much later. The early farming life was tough. Fields had to be cleared, seeds planted, weeds removed, crops harvested, and pests fought off, all without tractors, pesticides, or Spotify playlists. It was back-breaking work season after season. But humans did it because now they had something they'd never truly had before: control. Control over food meant control over time, and control over time meant the birth of culture. People started making pottery, weaving textiles, carving idols, telling stories, creating gods. After all, when your survival depends on rain and sunlight, you start talking to the sky a lot more. So yes, fire may have cooked our food, but farming cooked our destiny. It chained us to the soil, yet gave us the tools to build cities, temples, and nations. It made life harder, yet civilization possible. The greatest irony: the moment we stopped chasing food was the moment food started chasing us, in the form of debt, disease, and desire. Still, it's hard to overstate how radical this shift was. For millions of years, humans had been nomads. Now they had homes, gardens, and neighbors who borrowed tools and never returned them. Humanity had officially become sedentary. And as the fields grew, so did our appetites, not just for food, but for flavor, comfort, and meaning. Because once you've mastered survival, you start asking the real question: what tastes good? Chapter 2, Part 2, The Birth of Flavor, When Food Became Art. Picture this. You're a farmer 8,000 years ago. You've spent the entire day breaking your back under the sun, fighting weeds, chasing goats, and praying your grain doesn't rot. You sit down at sunset with a bowl of boiled barley mush, again, and suddenly realize something. This tastes like absolutely nothing. Congratulations, you've just invented boredom. That moment, that primal, tragic realization that food could be bland, sparked one of the most creative revolutions in human history, the birth of flavor. Because once people stopped worrying about whether they'd eat, they started wondering how to make it taste good. And from that thought came the first chefs, the first recipes, and eventually your favorite cooking shows. Let's start with the basics. Salt. Salt wasn't just a seasoning, it was magic. It preserved food, made it taste better, and became one of the earliest global currencies. Entire trade routes, wars, and empires were built on this tiny mineral. In fact, the word salary comes from sal, Latin for salt, meaning Roman soldiers literally got paid in salt. So next time someone complains about their paycheck, remind them it used to come in tiny white crystals. Before refrigeration, salt was the only thing standing between you and spoiled meat. It pulled moisture out, stopped bacteria from throwing a party, and let you store food for months. Suddenly, humans could travel farther, explore more, and, importantly, survive winter without starving. Salt didn't just flavor civilization, it preserved it. Next came spices, the exotic treasures of the ancient world. Imagine tasting pepper for the first time, or discovering cinnamon, cloves, or ginger. These weren't just ingredients, they were alchemy. Spices turned everyday grains and meats into something transcendent, a small luxury that made life taste like victory. And people would do anything for them. The spice routes stretched thousands of miles, connecting Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. Traders risked their lives crossing deserts and oceans just to bring back a handful of nutmeg, which, at one point, was literally worth more than gold. Entire kingdoms rose and fell over the trade of flavor. You could say the world got smaller because people wanted their food to taste better. But flavor wasn't just about pleasure. It was about preservation and medicine, too. Before antibiotics, spices were the next best thing. Garlic fought infection, turmeric reduced inflammation, and pepper stimulated digestion. People didn't fully understand why it worked, but they knew it worked. And that was enough. In some cultures, cooking became a form of pharmacology. Your dinner was also your doctor. Meanwhile, the art of smoke joined the flavor revolution. What started as a way to dry and preserve meat became a culinary technique in its own right. Smoking added depth, aroma, and character. The world's first barbecue. Archaeologists even found ancient smoking pits dating back over 7,000 years. So yes, when you fire up your backyard smoker today, you're carrying on a tradition older than the pyramids. And let's not forget fermentation, humanity's greatest culinary accident. Leave some fruit juice or grain mash sitting out, and nature does the rest. Yeast starts munching on sugar, and suddenly you've got wine, beer, or bread. A miracle. Fermentation wasn't just about taste, it transformed ingredients. Milk became cheese and yogurt. Cabbage became sauerkraut. Grapes became hangovers. These processes made food safer, more nutritious, and far more delicious. And because fermentation takes time, it also taught humans patience, a virtue that came in handy for everything from farming to philosophy. Slowly, food became more than fuel. It became identity. Different regions developed their own flavor signatures: Mediterranean olive oil and herbs, Middle Eastern spices and dates, Asian rice, soy, and ginger. What people ate became who they were. Cooking turned into storytelling. Every dish a memory, every flavor a map of where you came from. And here's the poetic twist. Flavor united people and divided them. It created trade, but also greed, curiosity, but also conquest. Columbus didn't sail west to discover America. He sailed west to find a faster route to Indian spices. Without flavor, there might have been no age of exploration at all. Let's be honest. No matter how advanced we get, humans are still ruled by our taste buds. We wage wars for oil, sure, but also for olive oil. We explore space while still arguing about the best pizza topping. Flavor drives us. It's the most ancient, universal form of art. So the next time you sprinkle salt or grind pepper onto your dinner, remember, you're participating in a story that began the day someone looked at their bowl of bland porridge and thought, "This could use something." That small, hungry thought gave us trade, technology, culture, even civilization itself. Because when humans learned to season their food, they also learned to season their lives. Chapter 2, Part 3, The Feast and the Faith, When Food Fed the Gods. At some point, after we learned how to farm, cook, and make food taste good, humanity did what humanity always does. We got dramatic about it, because when something gives you life, you start to wonder, what if it's sacred? Food had always been survival, but now it became something deeper, a spiritual transaction. The earth gave, humans received, and soon humans began to give back, in the form of offerings, sacrifices, and feasts. Thus began one of the most fascinating chapters in our history, when food became religion. Imagine the scene, the first farmers in Mesopotamia watching their barley sprout after a long dry season. To them, this wasn't agriculture. It was a miracle. They had no meteorology, no chemistry, no rain forecast, just hope and superstition. So when the rains came and crops flourished, they didn't say, "The irrigation system worked." They said, "The gods are pleased." That's how deities like Tammuz, Demeter, and Osiris, gods of grain, fertility, and rebirth, entered human mythology. Food wasn't just nourishment anymore. It was a conversation with the divine. Eat, and you honored the gods. Starve, and you feared their wrath. But humans didn't just thank the gods. We fed them. Across the ancient world, we left offerings of bread, fruit, meat, and wine at temples and shrines. The Aztecs offered chocolate to their gods, the Egyptians left honey and beer, the Greeks roasted whole animals and shared the leftovers as sacred meals. You could say the first dinner parties were actually religious events. Let's pause for a historical fun fact. The world's oldest recorded recipe isn't for soup or stew, it's for beer. Found on a Sumerian clay tablet dating back over 5,000 years, it's a hymn to the goddess Ninkasi, patron of brewing. The recipe is written as a song, basically ancient karaoke. Ninkasi, you are the one who waters the malt set on the ground. Yes, the first cookbook was also a prayer. Humanity has always had its priorities straight. In ancient Egypt, food and religion were inseparable. The afterlife, for example, was basically an eternal picnic, provided you could afford the entry fee. Tombs were stocked with bread, dried fish, and jars of beer to sustain the soul. The idea was simple. If you lived well, you'd eat well forever. Meanwhile, in Greece and Rome, religious festivals were culinary spectacles. Feasts were community events, part celebration, part worship, part social networking. A temple offering wasn't just about pleasing Zeus, it was also a great excuse for a neighborhood barbecue. Because, let's be honest, even back then, people would show up if there was free food. In India, the concept of prasada, food blessed by the gods, became central to Hindu worship. In return, believers shared it with others, creating one of the earliest examples of spiritual equality through food. Across Asia, offerings of rice, tea, or fruit remain traditions that connect the living to their ancestors, humble gestures that carry thousands of years of meaning. But not all sacred meals were peaceful. Sometimes, food became a line dividing the pure from the impure, the blessed from the cursed. Ancient dietary laws, like kosher in Judaism or halal in Islam, weren't just about hygiene. They were moral codes written in culinary form. What you ate became who you were. Food taboos gave society structure and sometimes control. In ancient Israel, eating pork wasn't just a health decision, it was a statement of identity. In India, the cow became holy. In Rome, sharing bread and wine symbolized loyalty or betrayal. Looking at you, Judas. These rituals shaped civilizations. The act of eating together, commensality, as anthropologists call it, created community and hierarchy at the same time. Who sat at the table, who got the best cut of meat, who served whom. All of it mirrored power and faith. And then came one of the greatest transformations in history, the rise of symbolic food. When Jesus broke bread and poured wine at the Last Supper, he wasn't introducing a new meal. He was reinterpreting one of humanity's oldest traditions, turning food into meaning. From that moment, the simple act of eating together became a bridge between the physical and the divine. If you think about it, every culture, every religion, every ritual, even today, still revolves around the same primal idea. Sharing food is sacred. Thanksgiving dinners, wedding banquets, Lunar New Year feasts, communion bread, Eid celebrations, they're all echoes of the same ancient instinct. To eat together is to belong, and that instinct runs deep. Archaeologists have found evidence that even Neanderthals buried their dead with flowers and food. It's as if, from the very beginning, we knew that a meal wasn't just about calories. It was about connection. So yes, food once fed the gods. But what it really nourished was us, our sense of wonder, gratitude, and togetherness. Because when you sit down to eat, whether it's a simple bowl of rice or a royal banquet, you're participating in a ritual as old as fire, as sacred as faith. The table is our oldest altar, and as civilization grew, that altar became something new, a battlefield of class, empire, and power, because once humans learned to worship food, it didn't take long before they started fighting over it. Chapter 3, Part 1, Bread and Blood, How Food Built Empires and Started Wars. If you thought food was just about survival or even faith, think again. Once humanity figured out how to plant seeds and bake bread, everything changed. Not just our diet, but our destiny. Because when you can feed armies, you can rule the world. Yes, food built civilizations and destroyed them too. Let's start with the most innocent-looking culprit of all, grain. A handful of grass seeds, tamed and cultivated, became the foundation of every empire in history. Wheat in Mesopotamia and Egypt, rice in China, maize in the Americas. Grain wasn't just a crop, it was power in edible form. Why? Because grain could be stored, measured, taxed, and controlled. You can't count how many berries a hunter gathered, but you can definitely count how many sacks of wheat a farmer harvested. And just like that, governments were born. Bureaucracy, that beautiful nightmare, sprouted right alongside barley and wheat. The first written records we've ever found? Not poetry, not philosophy. They were food inventories, ancient receipts carved into clay tablets. Humanity didn't invent writing to express love. We invented it to track grain taxes. Romantic, isn't it? Then came bread. Bread wasn't just food, it was civilization baked into a loaf. It required agriculture, fire, tools, time, and cooperation. It was the perfect metaphor for society itself. Individual grains crushed, combined, and transformed into something greater than the sum of its parts. In Egypt, bread fed the workers who built the pyramids. In Rome, it fed the mobs who ruled the streets. The phrase bread and circuses, or panemis or senses, literally meant give the people cheap food and entertainment, and they'll never revolt. Sound familiar? Fast forward a few thousand years, and you've got fast food and Netflix. Some things never change, but the control of food wasn't always peaceful. When food became power, hunger became a weapon. Empires rose by feeding their people and fell when they couldn't. The collapse of the Roman Empire, not just barbarians, it was also droughts, crop failures, and supply chain disasters. Yes, even ancient empires had logistics problems. Medieval kings hoarded grain to fund wars. Armies starved cities into surrender. Napoleon's invasion of Russia? Famously defeated by General Winter, yes, but also by the lack of bread. His supply lines collapsed and his troops were literally eating horse meat by the end. Even in modern times, food determines fate. During World War II, Britain survived because of bread rationing and food convoys across the Atlantic. Japan's empire fell in part because it couldn't feed itself once trade routes were cut. Food isn't just on the sidelines of history, it's been the main course all along. Now, let's talk about spice, because spice didn't just flavor food, it ignited conquest. Remember those exotic little powders and seeds from Asia? Pepper, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon. They were so valuable that European nations launched fleets, conquered continents, and colonized half the planet chasing them. In the 15th century, the Portuguese and Spanish raced to find new trade routes to India. Columbus, as you might recall, was looking for pepper when he accidentally bumped into the Americas. Imagine going out for seasoning and coming home with two continents. Then came the Dutch and the British, carving up the globe in their quest for flavor. The Dutch East India Company, the world's first multinational corporation, literally waged wars and executed people to monopolize nutmeg. At one point, a single island producing cloves was considered worth more than an entire European city. All this over the stuff you now sprinkle on your latte. But the pursuit of food didn't just shape trade, it shaped morality and inequality. While European elites feasted on sugar, chocolate, and coffee, enslaved people were forced to produce them. The sugar plantations of the Caribbean weren't just agricultural, they were industrial nightmares, fueled by suffering and blood. The sweet taste of progress came with a bitter cost. Food became a mirror of class. What you ate showed who you were. The poor had coarse bread and porridge. The rich had pastries and spices. Even today, your grocery list still reflects ancient hierarchies. Quinoa and avocado toast aren't just trendy. They're modern-day symbols of privilege, just like fine wine or imported tea once were. But here's the twist. The story of food and power isn't just about domination. It's also about exchange. When the old world met the new after Columbus, it triggered what historians call the Columbian Exchange, the greatest menu swap in history. Potatoes and tomatoes from the Americas transformed European cuisine. Corn and chili peppers conquered Asia. Coffee and sugar reshaped the global economy. Imagine Italy before tomatoes, India before chili, Ireland before potatoes. The world we know, its cuisines, its cultures, even its empires, all grew out of that global collision of crops. It's ironic, really. The same foods that sparked conquest eventually connected humanity. Every plate of fusion cuisine today, tacos al pastor, curry pizza, sushi burritos, is the messy, delicious child of that chaotic history. So yes, food built empires, crowned kings, and started wars. But it also laid the foundation for globalization, trade, and cultural exchange. Every bite you take carries a trace of those ancient battles between hunger and abundance, conquest and creativity, greed and survival. And as the world's population exploded, so did its appetite. Feeding millions, then billions, would soon become the greatest challenge of all. Because when food becomes a system, and that system breaks, the consequences aren't just political, they're planetary. Chapter 3, Part 2. The Industrial Bite, When Food Stopped Being Food. If the birth of agriculture was humanity's first revolution, then the Industrial Revolution was our second, and this one came with packaging. It's the moment when food stopped being local, seasonal, and personal, and started becoming profitable, processed, and portable. In short, food became business. Let's rewind to the early 1800s. Steam engines are roaring, factories are rising, and for the first time, cities are swallowing people faster than they can feed themselves. Farmers can't just walk their carrots to market anymore. The market's now 100 miles away and filled with 10,000 hungry factory workers. That's when food met industry and never looked back. The first great innovation was preservation, the art of making food last forever, or at least until next Tuesday. In 1795, Napoleon Bonaparte offered a cash prize to anyone who could invent a way to feed his armies without the food rotting. The winner, a French confectioner named Nicolas Appert, discovered that boiling food in sealed glass jars kept it fresh. Voila! Canning was born. It was revolutionary. Soldiers could march farther, sailors could cross oceans, and for the first time, humanity could eat strawberries in winter. Civilization had officially outsmarted the seasons. Of course, there was one small problem. The first cans were sealed with lead, and no one thought to check if that was safe. Spoiler, it wasn't. A lot of explorers went mad before we figured that out. By the late 19th century, factories were churning out food by the ton. Bread, once baked by hand, was now mass-produced. Butter came in tins, not churns. Meat-packing plants in Chicago processed entire herds of cattle with assembly line efficiency. Or as author Upton Sinclair famously described it in The Jungle, with a little bit of everything in every sausage. You didn't need to know where your food came from anymore, and that was the point. Industry made food anonymous. Milk didn't come from your neighbor's cow. It came from a brand. Fish didn't come from the ocean, it came from a company. This distance between humans and their food was new and unsettling. But it was also incredibly convenient because now you could feed cities, nations, even empires without ever seeing a farm. Then came the chemistry. Once scientists realized they could make food taste, smell, and look however they wanted, things got weird. Artificial preservatives, colorings, and flavor enhancers flooded the market. Your bread stayed soft for weeks. Your cheese never molded. Your soup came in powder form and just needed hot water. In 1869, a French chemist invented margarine, a cheaper alternative to butter made from animal fat. The dairy industry was so furious, they actually lobbied to have margarine dyed pink to make it look disgusting. Imagine spreading bubblegum-colored butter on your toast. Appetite ruined. But the chemistry didn't stop there. By the early 20th century, flavor had been fully industrialized. Instead of natural ingredients, factories began using compounds, isolated chemicals that mimicked taste. A molecule called vanillin replaced vanilla. Monosodium glutamate, MSG, gave everything a savory kick. The age of real food quietly ended, replaced by food products. Enter advertising, the true secret ingredient of modern cuisine. If you could make something cheap, long-lasting, and bland, you could make it appealing with the right marketing. Suddenly, breakfast wasn't porridge anymore. It was a balanced meal that makes you stronger, courtesy of Kellogg's Corn Flakes. Fun fact, John Harvey Kellogg invented his cereal not as a treat, but as a cure for sin. He believed bland food reduced unholy urges. Ironically, his marketing later turned it into a sugary icon of childhood joy. Nothing says pure living like frosted corn and cartoon tigers. And thus began the golden age of branding. Coca-Cola, Campbell's Soup, Hershey's, Heinz. They didn't just sell food, they sold identity. Your choice of ketchup or soda became a statement of class, comfort, even patriotism. The factory had replaced the farm, and the supermarket had replaced the harvest. But progress always comes with a price tag, and this one was written in calories. The more efficient we got at feeding ourselves, the less healthy our diets became. White flour, refined sugar, and industrial fats became staples. Processed foods promised convenience, but delivered addiction. By the mid-20th century, obesity, diabetes, and heart disease were rising faster than GDP. We had conquered hunger, only to be defeated by abundance. And yet, it wasn't all doom and gloom. The industrialization of food also meant fewer famines, cheaper calories, and global trade on a scale once unimaginable. People who once starved now had access to bread, rice, and canned goods year-round. The world got smaller and fuller. Still, something had been lost. The connection between people and their food, the sacred ritual of growing, cooking, and sharing, was replaced by packaging and profit margins. Food had become a product, scientifically designed to keep you coming back for more. The hunter-gatherer once searched for berries in the wild. Now his descendant wanders supermarket aisles under fluorescent lights, hunting discounts and low-fat labels. Evolution, it seems, has a sense of humor, because we didn't just industrialize food, we industrialized ourselves. Our diets, our routines, our cravings, all engineered for convenience, consumption, and control. The system that once promised abundance now dictates how we live, eat, and even think. And yet, a quiet rebellion is stirring. Around the world, people are starting to ask, where does my food come from? What's really in it? And what did my ancestors know that we forgot? That's where our story turns again, from machines back to meaning. Chapter 4, Part 1, The Lost Taste, How We Forgot What Real Food Tastes Like. At some point in the 20th century, something quietly tragic happened. Humans, for the first time in our long, messy history, forgot what real food actually tasted like. Not because there wasn't enough of it, but because there was too much of the wrong kind. The grocery aisles got longer, the labels got brighter, the ingredient lists got terrifying. And before anyone noticed, the flavors that once told us stories of land, season, and survival were replaced by the standardized taste of factory freshness. We had abundance, but no authenticity. Let's be clear, this didn't happen by accident. It was engineered. See, in nature, flavor is information. Sweetness signals energy. Bitterness warns of poison. Fat means calories for survival. Salt tells you, yes, this will keep you alive another day. But when food scientists figured out how to isolate and manufacture those signals to make sweetness sweeter, salt saltier, and fat fattier, our instincts got hijacked. This is called hyperpalatability. It's a fancy scientific term meaning your brain doesn't stand a chance. When you bite into a fast food burger or open a bag of chips, you're not eating food. You're triggering a neurological slot machine. The perfect combo of sugar, salt, and fat lights up your brain's reward system like fireworks. You feel satisfied for 10 minutes, then hungry again. It's not hunger, it's addiction. And so the old ways, the slow ways, began to vanish. The farmers' markets turned into supermarkets. The kitchen, once the heart of every home, became just another appliance showroom. Meals went from something made to something microwaved. The word fresh turned into a marketing slogan. Even our vocabulary changed. We used to talk about flavor. Now we talk about macros. Food became a math problem. Carbs, protein, calories. We started eating numbers instead of nourishment. And yet, something deep in us began to feel the loss. It's funny how nostalgia often starts in the stomach. By the 1970s, a quiet counter-revolution began. Across Europe and America, a few stubborn souls, chefs, farmers, scientists, even hippies, started to ask dangerous questions. Why do tomatoes taste like wet cardboard now? What happened to bread that doesn't feel like foam? Where did the flavor go? The answer, of course, was everywhere and nowhere. Industrial agriculture had optimized food for yield, not taste. The perfect tomato for shipping wasn't the one that tasted best. It was the one that didn't bruise on the highway. Chickens were bred to grow twice as fast, but with half the flavor. Wheat was refined for whiter flour, not richer bread. We had streamlined food into bland perfection. Then came the backlash, the slow food movement. It started in Italy in 1986 when a fast food chain opened near the Spanish Steps in Rome. Locals were outraged. A man named Carlo Petrini decided to fight back not with protests, but with pasta. He founded Slow Food, a global movement dedicated to preserving local cuisine, traditional farming, and biodiversity. Basically, the exact opposite of everything industrial food stood for. His slogan was simple: good, clean, and fair. Good, because flavor matters. Clean, because food should respect nature. Fair, because farmers deserve dignity. What began as a protest against McDonald's turned into a worldwide philosophy, one that asked us to rethink our relationship with what we eat. Meanwhile, scientists started rediscovering what our ancestors already knew. The healthiest diets in the world were ancient. The Mediterranean diet, with its olive oil, fish, and grains, reduced heart disease. The Okinawan diet, rich in vegetables and sweet potatoes, led to extraordinary longevity. The Nordic diet, with fermented foods and whole grains, improved gut health. These weren't trends. They were living fossils, echoes of the prehistoric, pre-industrial way of eating, seasonal, diverse, local, and unprocessed. In other words, the cavemen were kind of right all along. And that's where things got interesting. Because the more we studied ancient diets, from Paleolithic hunters to early farmers, the more we realized how intelligent they were, not by accident, but by adaptation. Our ancestors ate what their environments gave them: plants, meats, roots, grains, in balance with nature's rhythm. They didn't count calories or macros. They trusted taste, instinct, and scarcity. They didn't have superfoods. Every food was super because it was real. Today, the modern eater stands at a strange crossroads. On one hand, we have more access to food than any generation before us. On the other, we've never been so disconnected from it. We've outsourced our instincts to algorithms and our meals to machines, but the body remembers. The genes remember. Somewhere deep down, we still crave the primal satisfaction of a meal that tastes alive. The smoky sweetness of fire, the tang of fermented fruit, the crunch of something freshly pulled from the earth. That craving isn't nostalgia. It's evolution calling home. And so, the lost taste might not be lost forever. It's resurfacing in every backyard garden, every sourdough starter, every farmer's market stall, where people rediscover what food is supposed to be. Real food doesn't just fill you up, it connects you to the land, to the past, to the stories that got us here. Because the truth is, what the cavemen ate wasn't primitive. It was perfectly human. And as we search for the future of food, from lab-grown meat to vertical farms, the real secret might not be in what's next, but in what we left behind. Chapter 5, Part 1, The Future Feast, where technology meets our ancestors. Here we are, full circle, from cavemen crouched over campfires to scientists growing burgers in petri dishes, from roots and berries to protein powders and probiotic gummies. Humanity's dinner table has never been more crowded, confusing, or creative. And the question now isn't just what did cavemen eat? It's what will humans eat next? Because the future of food isn't about survival anymore. It's about balance between technology and tradition, progress and planet, appetite and ethics. Let's start with the most futuristic thing on the menu: lab-grown meat. Yes, it's real. Scientists can now take a few animal cells, no slaughter required, and grow them into edible muscle tissue inside a bioreactor. It's like brewing beer, except the yeast is replaced by steak. The result? A burger made of real beef without the cow. The process is called cellular agriculture, and it's potentially revolutionary. Traditional livestock farming uses nearly 80% of the world's agricultural land, emits tons of greenhouse gases, and guzzles water like a marathon runner in a desert. Cultured meat could slash that footprint dramatically, if we can make it cheap and tasty enough. Right now, it's still pricey. But remember, the first cell phone was the size of a brick. Innovation has a way of slimming down. And in a strange way, lab-grown meat is deeply prehistoric. Early humans were already trying to extract maximum nutrition with minimum harm. They used every part of the animal, every seed, every scrap. The scientists of today are simply continuing that mission, just with cleaner hands and fewer bones to bury. Then there's insect protein. Before you cringe, yes, people already eat bugs. 2 billion humans, actually. Crickets, grasshoppers, mealworms, all packed with protein, iron, and healthy fats. They're sustainable, reproduce fast, and taste, surprisingly, nutty. Westerners are the odd ones out here. The cavemen wouldn't have hesitated. They ate whatever didn't eat them first. Insects could be the perfect answer to a planet running out of space and patience. They can turn waste into food, require barely any land or water, and produce minimal emissions. The challenge isn't nutritional, it's psychological. We've built an empire on presentation, and it's hard to sell a roasted cricket next to a bacon cheeseburger. But who knows? In a few decades, your protein bar might have 6 legs and a smiley logo. And then we have the plants fighting back. No, not like in horror movies, more like in Silicon Valley. The rise of plant-based meat is rewriting the rules of what meat even means. Brands like Impossible and Beyond Meat use pea protein, soy, and beet juice to create burgers that look, taste, and even bleed like beef. It's culinary mimicry, a high-tech tribute to our carnivorous past, made entirely from plants. Of course, the irony is delicious. We've spent millennia trying to make plants taste like meat, only to realize that maybe meat was the problem all along. The cavemen hunted out of necessity. We eat steak out of habit. Maybe the real evolution isn't in technology, it's in restraint. Meanwhile, food itself is becoming data. AI systems are now predicting flavor combinations, optimizing crop yields, and designing personalized diets based on your DNA. Smart fridges track your groceries. Apps tell you when your bananas are about to go full zombie. In the not-so-distant future, you might sit down to dinner that's been calculated, customized, and nutritionally tuned just for you. A personalized prehistoric feast designed by algorithms. Alexa, cook something my ancestors would respect. But let's step back a moment. For all our gadgets, gizmos, and genetic recipes, we're starting to rediscover an uncomfortable truth. We can't out-engineer nature forever. Climate change is reshaping agriculture. Soil depletion, water scarcity, and collapsing pollinator populations threaten the foundation of our food systems. We're realizing that the planet doesn't need us to innovate food. It needs us to remember how to live with it. That's why the real future of food might look surprisingly ancient. Farmers are returning to regenerative agriculture, techniques that restore soil health instead of depleting it. Communities are reviving traditional seeds, native plants, and ancestral farming wisdom. The same knowledge that built the first civilizations might be what saves the last ones. In other words, the future feast might taste a lot like the past. Picture this, a dinner table lit not by firelight, but by soft LEDs. On it sits a mix of old and new, lab-grown steak, wild grains, fermented vegetables, maybe even a cricket taco or two. Every ingredient chosen not just for flavor, but for sustainability and story. A meal that's ethical, ecological, and maybe, finally, intelligent. Because when you look at the full arc of our journey, from scavenging for roots to engineering food in labs, you realize that we've never stopped doing the same thing, trying to understand our relationship with life itself. Every bite, every harvest, every invention has been part of one long, unbroken experiment in survival and meaning. And maybe that's the true secret of the prehistoric diet. It wasn't about protein, carbs, or calories. It was about connection between the eater, the earth, and everything alive. We don't need to go back to caves. We just need to remember why we started cooking in the first place. And that dear reader or late-night viewer still awake with a snack is the end of our journey, from fire to factory to future. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You've just time-traveled through 2.5 million years of dinner. So before you drift off to sleep, do what our ancestors did after every meal. Be grateful, be curious, and maybe, just maybe, save a bite for tomorrow. Chapter 5, Part 2. The Last Hunger. What we're really craving. So here we are, at the end of the feast. We've hunted, gathered, farmed, processed, packaged, and engineered our way through millions of years of meals. We've eaten mammoths and microwave burritos, sacrificed goats and cholesterol levels, and now we stand in the glowing light of our refrigerators. Still hungry, but hungry for what exactly? Because if history has taught us anything, it's that food was never just about feeding the body. It's always been about feeding the soul. Let's admit it. Modern humans are the best-fed species in history. And yet somehow, we've never felt emptier. We eat more, faster, and more efficiently than any generation before us. We have 24-hour delivery, meal replacement drinks, and smart nutrition that promises energy, longevity, and mood balance. And still, something is missing. That something is what the cavemen had in abundance: meaning. When they hunted, they risked their lives. When they cooked, they gathered. Every meal carried a story, a victory, a season, a shared memory around a fire. It wasn't just food, it was life, experienced together. Today, we've turned eating into a background activity. A podcast plays, a phone scrolls. The meal becomes a checklist between meetings. We consume, but we don't connect. We've gained convenience and lost communion. The irony? The future of food, all the technology, science, and sustainability we dream of, might not matter if we don't rediscover that lost hunger, the hunger for connection, gratitude, and story. Because no matter how advanced we get, our biology still belongs to the Paleolithic world. Our brains are wired for campfires, not notifications. We crave warmth, texture, community, the things no algorithm can deliver. And maybe that's the real end game, not just to eat better, but to eat truer. So what does that look like? Maybe it's sitting down for dinner without a screen. Maybe it's learning where your food actually comes from. Maybe it's baking bread with your hands, even if the store sells it cheaper. Maybe it's realizing that a shared meal, even a simple one, is an act of quiet rebellion in a world addicted to speed. Food, after all, was humanity's first language. It's how we said, "I care," "You're safe," "We survived." When you cook for someone, you're not just feeding them, you're telling them, "You matter enough for me to use my time and fire." The cavemen didn't have words for love or gratitude, they had roasted meat. And somehow, that was enough. It's tempting to imagine that progress will save us, that someday we'll print dinner from a 3D food printer, perfectly balanced in nutrients, free from cruelty and waste. Maybe we will, maybe we should, but let's make sure we don't print out the poetry too, because flavor isn't data, it's memory, it's smoke on the wind, it's the sweetness of a fruit that tastes of summer and sunlight. It's your grandmother's soup, your friend's late-night noodles, your lover's burnt pancakes. Those are the moments that fed us long before science got involved. The oldest human technology isn't the wheel or the spear, it's the shared meal. So when we ask, what did cavemen really eat? Maybe we're not just curious about diet, maybe we're longing for something we've lost, a simpler relationship with food, with nature, and with each other. And if that's true, then the next revolution in food won't come from a lab or an app. It'll come from a table, a real one, wooden, messy, warm, where someone looks you in the eye and says, "Eat." You must be hungry, because that, dear reader, is the oldest sentence in human history. Epilogue. From fire to flavor. When the first flame lit up the darkness, it didn't just cook our meat, it cooked our story. Every civilization since has been a reflection of what we chose to eat and why. And while our tools have changed, from stone blades to stainless steel, from bone marrow to molecular gastronomy, the question remains the same. How do we feed ourselves without forgetting who we are? The answer perhaps is this: eat with curiosity, cook with gratitude, share with love. Because food isn't history, food is humanity. And maybe, if we listen closely enough, every bite still carries a whisper from that first fire. Remember where you came from.